Hello and welcome to Atheist Torah Study. My name is Emma Lugo, and today we're going to be exploring Parsha Noach from an atheist perspective. The purpose of Atheist Torah Study is to track the Jewish tradition of studying the Torah 1 week at a time through an atheist lens. So I'll be going through the Torah. It's a year-long project I'm doing for my own gratification more than anything, to give commentary on each week's Torah reading through an atheist perspective. And this is not meant in any way to be an insult to religious tradition or to religious people. As an atheist, I have very high respect for various religious traditions around the world, some parts of those traditions. So I have tremendous respect for Judaism, also the other traditions I'm familiar with, Christianity, Buddhism, which isn't technically a religion, but Islam, and many paganism, Wicca. I have a lot of respect for all of those traditions. I myself am a Jew, so I'm very much involved in Jewish tradition, and but I'm also an atheist. My heart is an atheist heart. I love the freedom of not believing in any God, not having a God, create the narrative for how I understand the world. So I really appreciate being God free. But at the same time, I also recognize that, this God is part of the world that we live in. Even if it's as, as Yuval Harari put in his book Sapiens, even if this is, he postulates that the thing that makes society work over the generations is kind of a collective imaginary belief system that everyone kind of holds in common. And by having this shared imaginary belief, whether it's a belief in God or a belief in money or a belief in, some other concept, it creates kind of a level playing ground for everyone to operate under. And his theory is that for a long time that was the function of religion. And that, I think Harari really looks at the world and says the world is fundamentally meaningless. And it probably is. We're about to go into Parsha Noach, which is all about the creation of meaning. But I'll start by saying, as an atheist and also as an existentialist, that from my perspective, the world is fundamentally meaningless. It doesn't mean that it's without purpose and meaning that we give it. This is what Sartre and Camus really advocated for, in existentialism. At least one of the many strains of thought that came out of existentialism was that the world is meaning that we ourselves create. So, and that's what I believe too. The nature didn't create the opportunity for us to have meaning. I'm not really a naturalist either. This is why I don't really, even though I have lots of friends who are Wicca and pagan, I'm not really a nature-based person either. I don't really worship nature, because to me nature is kind of it's kind of mechanistic. So, but anyways, I'm like saying all the good stuff, not all the. I'm babbling. That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm babbling. So let's go on with the Torah study. That's what we're actually here for. This is Parsha Noach. Parsha Noach is the second parsha in the Torah series. Again, for those who are kind of new to Torah study, we Jews read 54 parshas a year. A parsha is just a section of the first, and if you're a Christian, it's the first 5 books of the Bible. So that's it. I mean, the Bible is a pretty long book. This is just the first 5. But in Judaism, we kind of focus on that. We focus on those first 5 books, and that's called the Torah. And I heard a couple of interesting theories this week I'd never heard before, and I definitely wanted to share those. A new theory that I heard this week about the reading of the Torah was that, if you remember last week, I said what I believe, which is for a long time I've really believed this, that and I've gotten some of this. Let me show you my books too. This is a commentary on the Torah by Richard Friedman, which is one of my favorite books to use for giving Torah commentary. And this is the Aristarch Scroll. This is the Tanakh. This one's just in English. It should probably be in English and Hebrew. But anyways, that's the Torah. That's actually the Tanakh, which is the Torah, the prophets, and the sacred writings. I heard a new theory this week about it's new to me, about the writing of the Torah. And, this Akkadian scholar has this theory that the Torah was mostly compiled around the time of the city of Alexandria and the Great Library of Alexandria, and that the reason that it was being constructed was, and this is weird because this is like a Greek thing. One of the things that we do a lot in Judaism is we talk about Greek stuff, because Greek stuff pops up all the time, and it's always kind of like worming its way into like discussions of things like the Torah. But there's this theory that he has that the Torah was, I mean, there were different maybe texts that were kind of floating around, but that the Torah itself was kind of redacted and compiled during the period of the Great Library of Alexandria, because at that time, his theory is that at that time, when they put together the Library of Alexandria, which was really like, it was really like the first library in the world, and it wasn't just like an archive where people went to, this is what he said, it wasn't just an archive where people went to dump their documents, but it was actually a library, like the way that people use libraries today in an academic sense, the way that scholars use libraries. And so it became this center where people from all around the world who were interested in scholarship and in learning came, and they came to use the library and to get involved in the intellectual and social trends that were kind of buzzing in Alexandria. It sounds like Alexandria was a pretty hip place to be in about the 3rd century BC. Anyway, so his theory is that that was about when the Torah was really compiled, was around the 3rd century BC, and that it was compiled kind of as part of a movement at that time, because as these different scholars came together and began to study all the different texts, some people who were part of a tradition that was basically Jewish, like saw the emerging trends and realized that this would benefit them too in their tradition. So that's a theory. I mean, nobody really knows exactly how the Torah was written, but that's just another theory. And what Jews believe is that the Torah was written by Moses. So I don't personally believe there ever was anybody named Moses, but I already talked about that last week. Anyways, so this is what my Torah studies are like, by the way. I do a lot of babbling and just wandering around things that are interesting to me. So I don't expect almost anyone to actually watch this. If you do watch it, that's great. I'm really happy that you're sticking around. I do this for an hour once a week. I let it out every Saturday morning. So, but again, this is just the way that I do it, and I'm not like asking anyone to pay attention to me. I'm just doing this for my own edification, because I just think this is really an interesting topic. So we're going to get to the Parsha now. This is Parsha Noach. This is the second Parsha, and we're still at the beginning of the creation of the world in the Jewish tradition. We're still very, very early in the creation of the world. So in in the Torah, this first part, the first book of the Torah, Genesis, it's mostly supposed to be about the creation of the world, and it starts in this like made up time that is really it's like people back then when they wrote the Torah, they realized that they need to have a good origin story, and this is a really nice origin story, and there's still like this first part is still kind of about trying to explain something about how the world began, and then it's going to jump really quickly from the creation of the whole world into just following a particular group of people, the Jews, and it's going to follow their creation. So Richard Friedman in his Torah commentary calls this the world's first novel. So he thinks the Torah is kind of a novel because it's an intergenerational story. This very first part of the book is an intergenerational story of a family. And then that's the first book. And then after that, it's the story of a group of people. So that's what it is from Jewish tradition. Noach is let's get into it. We'll read some of it and we'll comment along the way. By the way, for most of the book of Noach, I'm going to be following the triennial cycle of Judaism, which is the triennial cycle is, as Jews, we read the Torah once a week, but we don't read the whole Torah because it's really long. Like this week's portion is chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10, and chapter 11 of Genesis. And if you've ever read the Bible, there's a lot of like, Jehoshaphat begat, Methuselah, and Methuselah begat, King David, whatever. I mean, that's not actually a lineage. I just totally made that up. But there's a lot of stuff that's just like, you kind of want to just get through it and get to the good stuff if there is any good stuff. But so it's a long read to read like all 6 chapters of the Torah in any sitting. I mean, it's a long read. So anyway, so Jews break it up. We break it up into thirds, and then we read a third of each portion each year. So and the portions are kind of like this week's Torah portion is Noach, and it's based on a character. So it's actually named after someone, and it's named after the person of Noah. And in Jewish tradition, Noah is supposed to be a righteous person. Now, I love this portion because we have a rainbow, and I love rainbows because I am queer, and it's great to have a symbol of queer identity at the very beginning of the Bible. That means that, at least in the tradition that most Westerners were raised in, there's something in there that's subversive, and it kind of tells you something. I've actually seen a lot of rainbows this week, and I've seen them really close too. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and we get lots of rain out here. It rains constantly all winter. It starts raining in the fall, and it doesn't let up until early summer. It's just rain, rain, rain. And there's just been the most beautiful rainbows this week, and they've been really close. Like you can just see all of the colors, the yellows and the greens and the blues, and they're just like they've been really close, like just hundreds of yards away, and then behind them is the green trees, and it's just so gorgeous. I love rainbows. Rainbows are the best thing, and anyways, this is kind of the rainbows at the end of this parsha. Well, not quite at the end. It's in the middle of the story, and so the story So we're going to get to the good stuff here. We're going to do the Torah blessing in just a minute, I promise. But the story it's kind of a ridiculous story. I mean, all the stories in ancient literature, in some ways, to us as moderns, they seem kind of ridiculous. But they're also really interesting and full of lots of great stuff. Like, there's something about this archaic writing and these archaic constructions of stories that are really interesting. There's something about them that is you know they're kind of fun. So but they're also kind of ridiculous too. So in this story, for some reason there's just one person, and his name is Noah, and God decides that he's the only righteous person on earth, and that he's going to save him because he's an ethical person. So I mean, right away you have to ask yourself, like, now why would, like, what's the point of this? I mean, that's what I wonder. What's the point of this? Why is this here in this book that all of these people read, and it's not like other creation stories. I mean, one of the things that's different about this story and about this idea of the God is that in a lot of creation myths, the God is kind of distant. He's not so personally involved in the creation of the world and in the people of the world. And the God is kind of like more up high. So this God in this story is still pretty up high, but he's also pretty close. I mean, in the last parsha, he walks around in the garden with Adam and Eve. They're naked. They're all walking around. I mean, I don't think God's naked. I don't know what God is. But anyways, they're all kind of walking around, and I mean, this God is much more approachable. It's like kind of more like your buddy, sort of involved in the day to day stuff, but also still like way up there somewhere. So it's a little bit of both. It's very clever. So then they go to the story of Noah, and in the story of Noah, the God's still way up there, and the so just to, like, give away the ending. So the story of Noah is that this God destroys the world because he just thinks it's full of evil, and he decides he's going to destroy the world, but he's just going to save one person, and that one person is then going to repopulate that one person and his family are basically going to repopulate the entire world. So, but that's, I mean, I think that I don't know if it was meant at the time to be understood as a metaphor, but I mean, I don't think that maybe people really did believe that somebody flooded the entire world. I mean, I know that there's lots of Christians who believe that now. And there's even, just to go back for just a minute, there is, in case you've never heard of it, there is an actual Noah's Ark in Kentucky, and I've driven by it before because I used to live in the South, and you pay like $50 to go there, and it's this big thing, and it shows dinosaurs like living with Bible characters, and it's a whole thing. It's basically somebody created this to sort of support the idea of creationism, and creationism is this idea that unfortunately is lifted straight out of the Jewish Torah, and it's completely misinterpreted. And so, anyways, but you can go see it if you ever want to. If you want to waste $50, I think I'm pretty sure it's still there because I hear about it a lot. So, all right, well, let's do the blessing for Torah study. This is Parsha Noach, and the blessing for Torah study. A couple of digital resources I do want to share too, because I do almost all of my learning nowadays digitally. So I mean, I'm talking like the internet, YouTube, just a lot of JSTOR online, Savara. So, but a couple of places I go for doing the kind of learning that I do, I go to reformjudaism.org, which is a really great place to find all kinds of resources about the Reformed Jewish tradition. I also go to Savara, which is a queer radical yeshiva. That's SVARA. You can also go to, actually, the place I do most of my learning is on Sefaria, which is SEFARIA, Sefaria. And there, Sefaria, you can really find anything that you need if you're interested in learning about this kind of information and these traditions. I should say, where do I go as an atheist too? I've been thinking about that, and I'll have to think about some resources. I mean, to me, the atheist stuff is that's sort of foundational. I wouldn't say that I go to Richard Dawkins for atheism, even though I know Richard Dawkins is the most famous atheist. I think that I actually go to the Bible for my atheism because the Bible was the original inspiration of my atheism. The Bible, the Tanakh, the Western religious traditions. Those are the things that actually made me an atheist. So my atheism is actually founded in these documents and in an examination of them. But for the rest of my atheism, I probably blame higher education. So going to college definitely helps you become an atheist. If you want to learn more about atheism, I would definitely recommend going to college and doing some studying and becoming a critical thinker. That really helps out. So, but I'll think of some more. There's tons of resources out there for atheists, and I should say some of them as long as I'm in the middle of this. So one really great resource for atheists, if you want to make some connections, is the Atheist Alliance, which is a national organization that advocates for atheists and for, civil rights. Another great organization I've been involved in for at different times in my life is Americans United for Separation of Church and State, which is, I think Barry Lynn founded that. But it's a really great organization that advocates for, really maintaining the wall of separation between church and state, which is really foundational to the American constitutional process. Podcast online, if you want to listen to stuff online. One of my favorites is definitely The Thinking Atheist. I've always thought that was a really, really fun podcast to listen to. It's usually got lots of good information. And I'll try to think of other resources that I, go to as an atheist. But again, the foundational resource for me as an atheist is actually the Bible. The Bible is the best place to go if you're an atheist because it's the Bible plus a little bit of learning is really good for deconstructing. Anyway, so let's get started. We're going to start with the blessing for Torah study. The blessing for Torah study, it's a blessing that we say in Judaism. Sorry, I'm just looking at my computer here. It's a blessing that we say in Judaism, and I'm actually going to read the Hebrew and the English this time. I didn't do that last time because I was being kind of a smarty pants, and I need to just respect the tradition because I really do respect it. So here's the Hebrew. The Hebrew is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotah v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So that's the Hebrew. Hebrew is the language of the Torah, and Hebrew is the language that was spoken around the time that the Torah was written, and it's still the language that Jews use to pray. So when Jews get together to pray in synagogue, they pray in Hebrew. And a lot of Jews learn Hebrew and English as kids. Anyways, the translation is, Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. So in Jewish tradition, the study of the Torah is considered, I would say it's considered an obligation, but I don't know for sure that it's actually an obligation, but I know it's just something that Jews do a lot. We all read the Torah. And, not all Jews do. Actually, not a lot of Jews do read the Torah. But if you go to a synagogue, if you're involved in the Jewish tradition, kind of as a kid or as an adult, if you're kind of engaged with it, then you end up probably reading the Torah. So Parsha Noach, I'm gonna read the very just before the beginning of the parsha, and then a little bit of the very first part of it, and then I'm gonna go right away to chapter 11. So we're starting right now in Genesis chapter 6, Bereshit chapter 6, and we're gonna go to the end of the parsha is the end of chapter 11. So in the again, I did mention this before in the Jewish triennial cycle, which only some Jews follow. Not a lot of Jews do, but the ones who do follow it. In the triennial cycle, it's they break up each parsha into thirds because again the parsha is so long. So the parsha for this cycle, according to Hebrew calendar, and if you want to look that up, that's hebcal.com, hebcal.com. It'll give you the readings that Jews follow for every triennial cycle. Right now is Genesis 11:1 to 32. So it's the Tower of Babel, which is great. It's something atheists can talk about for half an hour, which is probably what I'll be doing. But first, I'm going to read the beginning of the parsha because the way that parshas go, usually all the really good stuff is at the very beginning, and then a lot of the stuff in between is kind of boring. But it's not always like that. I mean, sometimes a parsha kind of starts. Well, some parshas are really boring. Like some parshas, like when they talk about the building of the Mishkan. Oh my God, it's like just unbelievable. And then some parts are just so bloody horrible. I mean, they're just like, well, I mean, there's just so much blood and carnage and destruction, and you just think like, who wrote this and why are we still reading it? And then some parts are really great, like Bereshit. I still think the beginning of Genesis is like just really fun to read. I mean, it's like a fairy tale, and it's really fun. It gets you thinking. Um, and this part too, Noach is like that too. It's kind of like it's like more fairy tales, and they're kind of fun to read. It's a fun way to think about how people maybe created the world. There's lots of different cultural traditions out there, and they're all valid. They're all good stories. People make up all kinds of great stories about how the world began, about how their people began. This is the story, and I don't know what it is in us as Homo sapiens that we like want to create these stories. It's something in our brain, it's something in our brain that we need to do. We need to like make up stories and try to understand something about the world. And it doesn't really matter that much if the story is true or not. What really matters is that there's something about the story that like kind of makes you feel satisfied, that explains something. And I mean that's in a way that's kind of that's not exactly how we learn science, but it is a little bit. I mean, science is also a kind of story. But it's much more than just a story. I mean, science is an entire process. I mean, science is it's a way of testing, analyzing, and creating, a hypothesis about observable phenomena. But it's also a kind of storytelling because it ends up being a story. I mean, that's how we got, the theory of natural selection. I mean, Darwin did just so much studying, an incredible amount of studying. But what really got him thinking about it was just hopping around from island to island in the Galapagos and being able in real time to observe the differences in the different species and how they evolved. I mean, species that were similar to each other and the kind of differentiation that each one did. And it's not, I mean, there were other people who were kind of thinking the same way and evolving the same kinds of thinking at the same time as Darwin. But, he just happened to be the one who got all the credit and he wrote the book. I mean, he did create this incredible, just, I mean, to me, Darwin's theory of natural selection is like just pure inspired genius. It's something that has transformed our understanding of the world. And when we get these theories that come along, they each one kind of adds on the other. And these theories all together make the story that we understand. But before we had this, I mean, unfortunately, in some ways, because of these religious traditions, the progress that science made, because you can look back in history and you can see places where science and the scientific process really had the opportunity to take shape, but they just didn't quite make it, because of different things, because of how the governments were organized, or because of, the barbarians coming from the north, whatever the reason. There's a lot of places in history where you could sort of see the beginning of the blossoming of something that's led to like what we have now. But the blossoming that we have right now really came in about the 1500s. That was when the foundations of what we understand now as our Western cultural tradition really found their root. And they found their root in, traditions like the Renaissance, and in, a whole bunch of systems that began to change, that really paved the way for the advent of modernity. And one of the things that's really foundational to that is the kind of story that we tell ourselves, as, I don't know what other word to use. Maybe I'm using a privileged term, but as Westerners, one of the, or as, I don't know, whatever you want to call us, as atheists. For me, as an atheist, part of how I tell my story is based on all of these different texts. And these texts have helped to let me understand what I am. And then, if you're lucky, you get to go to high school, you get to go to college, and you get to learn about all of the different ways that we are. But we still have these stories in the Torah, and in the Bible. And they're part of what we carry with us as part of our own point of origin. This kind of says we come from this place. We come from the Levant. We come from the Middle East. We come from Eastern Europe. We come from, Western Europe, whatever. These are like the points of origin. And this is like some of the stories that we carry around over the generations. So, anyways, this is the story of Noah. So let's read the very first chapter, chapter 6, and then we'll go to the Tower of Babel. And we'll be skipping a lot today because there's just so much to talk about. And I usually only get through 2 or 3 verses and then I can't stop talking. But I'm going to try to do a straight read for about the first 10 or 12 verses if I can without doing too much commentary. So here goes. Genesis chapter 6, verse 1. When humankind began to increase on earth, and daughters were born to them, the males among the divine beings, these are the Nephilim, the males among the divine beings saw how pleasing the human women were, and took wives from among those who delighted them. Hashem said, my breath shall not abide in humankind forever, since it too is flesh. Let the days allowed to them be 120 years. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on earth, when divine beings cohabited with human women, who bore them offspring. Such were the heroes of old, the men of renown. Hashem saw how great was human wickedness on earth, how every plan devised by the human mind was nothing but evil all the time. And the divine regretted having made humankind on earth. With a sorrowful heart, the divine said, I will blot out from the earth humankind who I created, humans together with beasts, creeping things, and birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. But Noah found favor with the divine. So that's the prelude to the to the book of Noah. I haven't even gotten to the book of Noah yet. This is pathetic. I'm such a terrible Torah scholar. Anyways, so that's the prelude to the book of Noah. I don't even know now if we're going to get to chapter 11, but I'm going to try. So, okay, so there's these characters here, the Nephilim. The Nephilim, what are they? It says that they're fallen angels. So what does that mean? What is an angel? I don't know. What is an angel? I've never seen an angel. There's no description of exactly what an angel is. I think that at the time this was written, it was just understood like, you just know what an angel is because there's angels. I really think that's pretty much what it was. It's like, when people wrote this book, they believed in God. People still believe in God. I'm not trying to diss anyone. A lot of people still believe in God. But this is like, so there's angels. So that somehow there's a God and somehow there's angels. But this hasn't really explained to us what God is. And one of the things that really interests me as an atheist is what kind of God is this? God is just an internal experience of the world. There's nothing real about God. The universe it's just what it is. We're stuck here on Earth in the form that we have for the short time that we live. And we're basically animals, just like all the other animals. And we have a nice life. We've tried to control all of the resources on this planet and made it something that's livable for us. And in the process, we're basically destroying it. But who is this God? There's no God. So who is the God? Why are people creating the God? Is there an instinct? Is there some sort of religious instinct that's just like genetic? Is that just a genetic part of human identity? Is the God, so by the time that this book was written, we were already like 4,000 years into civilization, but we still didn't have really a scientific understanding of how civilizations evolved. We just knew that, at the time these were written, people they just existed. They were born, they found these societies that they existed in. There were already priests and soldiers and empires, all of these things already existed, but it was all like Bronze Age technology and a Bronze Age understanding. So, where did the gods come from? There's this belief that the gods go way, way back. So, what is the place in Turkey? Oh, I can't remember right now, but it's Göbekli Tepe. Is that it? Göbekli Tepe, which is like one of the, I think it's like the earliest site that has been excavated by archaeologists. That's like understood to be a site that was kind of a religious ritualistic site. So like someplace where people gathered to do some kind of religious ritual. Göbekli Tepe, I think that's what it is. It's in Turkey, and it was just discovered like not that long ago, like 30 years ago. And I guess that's from about 11,000 years ago. But don't just assume, if you go to a church, if you go to a synagogue, if you go to a mosque, and people just tell you, oh, if you're ever trying to have a conversation as an atheist, and people just tell you, oh, well, people have always believed in God. It's just a given. Never accept that, because people should be able to tell you where their God comes from and how their God exists in the framework of the world. There's no reason you can't, and there's no reason to just assume that religion and a belief in a God is just somehow innate. That's one of the foundational myths of Western Christian tradition. I don't know if it is a foundational in Jewish tradition. I don't think it really is, but I mean, I think that in the Western intellectual tradition, which has mostly been like heads of state and centers of power in the West, there's always been this idea put forward throughout all the way into modernity that there's just an instinct for religion, that people just have a natural instinct for religion, and that God is this thing that, even among intellectuals and academics, I think there's this idea that God is just a given. There's always going to be a God. Like, people are always going to create gods. But I would say don't accept that. Don't accept that, because, I, for one, don't know that that's true. And until somebody explains to me what the mechanism is that makes a God, I'm not going to just accept that that's a given. I'm going to say that a God is something that people say exists, and then they tell their children, and then those children get indoctrinated, just like I did, and just like most of us do. We get indoctrinated into this, and it happens to us before we're even old enough to know any better. And why do we get indoctrinated into this? I don't know. I mean, I think people have a fear of death. I think that's a big one. People want to know that their existence means something, and that they got to, that there's something that meant something about their life. And I think that it's this anxiety that we have about meaning, and this sense that like we're supposed to mean something more than what we are, that creates this space that then it gets occupied by this deity. So you see, I mean, I think that most of the really hard work around what creates a deity is really rooted in our fears and our anxieties. And, we use that as a placeholder. So we're already getting into that area that Yuval Harari basically talks about in Sapiens, which I just read this week, so that's why I'm kind of quoting it a lot, of, that's where we project that anxiety. We kind of put it in a space and we call it God. But what is it? I mean, in the Torah, it's great because you have a record of one idea about what a God is. And so with that record, you can start to ask yourself a lot of questions, but you're not going to get very far if you just do a straight read. You might get somewhere. So in this story, at the beginning here, you have this deity. So first of all, you got the story, there's people. And, since it's the creation mythology, the idea is that there's now lots of people. They're reproducing like rabbits. And that among those people, the Nephilim, the angels or divine beings, came down, and they cohabitated with the women who they found attractive. So that's good. I guess, whatever. I don't know what to say about that. Anyway, so they found the women attractive. The Nephilim did. And they slept with the women, and then they had like more people. So that's like the first part of this is just the prelude to Noach. And then after that, the divine creature, the divine being, God, says, here decides to limit people's life. So before that, for whatever reason, there's this belief that like people live for hundreds of years. Like Noah, I think Noah is supposed to live for like 600 years. I don't remember all of them, but I remember Methuselah. Like Methuselah lived for like 969 years. And I think Enoch lived for 365 years. That's what I remember from the Torah. So anyways, these people lived a long time. And it doesn't exactly, I'm not sure what that would be like. The longest, so on Earth, in reality, there are some animals that live a long time, but they're all down at the bottom of the ocean, and they have a very slow heart rate, and they don't do much. So, that's the secret to a long life. Just live in a cold, dark place and don't really do much of anything. and you might live for a couple hundred years. I mean, lifespans vary across the spectrum. Although most animals don't live more than a couple of hundred years, but now trees, oh my God, now trees can live for thousands of years. And I have no idea how long something like the super fungus lives. The super fungus might be like, who knows? I'll have to look that up. That'd be really interesting to see how long, like the super fungus. There's one in Oregon actually. It's a super fungus, and it's like, I think it's like 4 square miles. They think that mycelium, they think that mushrooms like have networks that are similar to a neural network in a brain, which is really interesting to me. Yeah, so mycelium are very interesting. Anyways, back to the Torah portion. So they live for 120 years. So apparently the divine being here decided that they only live for 120 years. Who knows why we only live as long as we do? I mean, how long do we live? My great grandmother died when she was 68 or 69. My grandfather died, I think, when he was 70. You know, people. I have one relative who died in his 50s. People just live as long as they do, and that's just what happens. I mean, I think that from an evolutionary perspective, I think that's what's pretty obvious is that we're supposed to live long enough to reproduce the next generation. And so we're kind of doing the same thing that basically all the other animals on Earth do and all the other plants. I mean, we live long enough to grow, and then we reproduce, and then apparently we're not needed anymore. So then we go. I mean, evolution didn't create us to like keep on reproducing more, like the way that the Bible says. The Bible says that, because I assume that during the 969 years that Methuselah, for instance, existed, like who knows how many babies did he have? Not him, but his wives, sorry. How many babies? And of course, this is so again, you notice right away with the tradition, it doesn't name the women. I mean, it does a little bit, but it's already kind of been blotting out the women. So it's like this document is foundational in patriarchy, but that's nothing new. There's also a lot of places where women's voices really assert themselves. So I want to say something for just a minute about Jewish tradition here. Part of the reason that, like, in Jewish tradition, we still work with this document, in spite of how ridiculous it is because it really meant something to people 1,000 years ago. It meant something to people 500 years ago. It meant something to people 2,000 years ago. And there's something about the carrying of that story over the many generations that really means something. People put their entire lives into shaping and navigating the spaces and the territory around what the text gave them. So, in Jewish tradition, and I'm not going to get into politics because I just could do that so easily. And it's just, I'm not doing that right now. So it's Saturday morning when I'm recording this. I'm just not going to do that. But just to let you know, in case you're curious, I'm an anti-Zionist. I'm a leftist, obviously. And I could go on all day about politics. If you wanted to hear me do another 24-hour devar about politics, leftist politics, I can easily do that, but I'm not doing that right now. But anyways, in the story of Jewish tradition, there's so Jews got kicked out of Israel in like the first century AD by the Romans, who were dirty, rotten, filthy bastards. They're basically like the Germans of their era. I mean, the Romans were horrible, horrible people. And, anything that you see nowadays about, there's lots of television about the Romans. And, the Romans were a nasty, horrible imperialist culture. They're just like the same as the Germans, only different, And the Romans, they came around to all these the way that they're like a big gang, and they went around the world, and they had lots of they had like 250,000 soldiers, and they just they mass murdered entire civilizations. They just enslaved people. They took what they wanted, and they created an empire. And we're still living with the consequences of some of the terrible things that the Romans did. And one of the terrible things that the Romans did was they went to Israel, and they murdered the Jews, they enslaved the Jews, they destroyed their temple, and they sent them into exile. And the Jews were not the only people that the Romans destroyed. And this isn't the first time it happened to the Jews either. This happened to the Jews 500 years before that by the Babylonians. But the Babylonians, it wasn't quite so bad. And then, and then Judaism was in exile for like 2,000 years until the creation of the state of Israel. And now some Jews live in what's considered diaspora, and some Jews live in Israel. But I'm not going to talk about the politics of Israel because you already heard me. I'm an anti-Zionist. Being an anti-Zionist means that I don't believe in the political ideology of Zionism. So that's basically what it means. Anyways, too much politics. I'm sorry I even went there. So we've got this story here where I can't believe it. I've only got 7 minutes left. I have hardly talked about anything. Okay, so there's the Nephilim, and I'll tell you what, let's get right to the part I wanted to read this week. So I've only got 7 minutes left, and I'm going to use that last 7 minutes to talk about today's reading. Today's reading is chapter 11, verses 1 through 32 of the book of Genesis. And this is the story of the Tower of Babel. And it's a great story. Oh my God, and then we've just skipped over everything. So we've skipped over like the destruction of the world, the flood, then the rehabiting the world, and then Noah gets drunk and falls asleep naked, and that's the curse. So it's just weird. Like after all that, there's this weird little esoteric story about Noah's kids find him drunk and naked. And it's okay, what is there's a lot there. I could probably do an entire year's long. This is just I'm gonna have to get better at this. I don't know. There's just too much to talk about. Okay, so chapter 11. This is the story of the Tower of Babel. And it's another one of those origin stories. And it's really clever. It's there's these people, and they're trying to figure out how are there so many languages on Earth? How did that happen? And of course, now we know as moderns that the reason that there's so many languages is there's always been lots of languages. There's so one of the theories of the origin of language is that there's kind of a language gene. There is an adaptation. This is Noam Chomsky's theory, and I love it too. It's a great theory. I don't know anything about if it's true or not, but it's Noam Chomsky basically kind of paired this idea of a capacity for language with the idea of natural selection, and kind of said that there was. It's not that people did. We know that lots of animals have language. We know that crows have language, and that chimpanzees have language, and we know that whales have language. So we know that people have all different kinds of species have ways of creating something that we recognize as language. But what is it about human civilization that makes our capacity for spoken language? We have a spoken language that's complex and that is unique and is probably one of the things that propelled human civilization. So Chomsky thinks that, there was probably an adaptation that happened at some time in our evolutionary history, a recent adaptation, in the last I'll have to go look this up to remember all the details of it. But basically, there's just that there was, an adaptation for something that's basically like a language chain, and but it can express itself in so many different ways. I mean, we know just by looking at human civilization. So the evolution of language probably isn't differentiated that much from like the expansion of human cultures. Not, and it's not really fair to say that there was human cultures, like really just animal groups, human animal groups that lived in groups and traveled around Africa and then expanded into, Western Asia. We know that as these groups expanded, they brought with them their own local patterns of communication. And so, the idea of like a proto, I don't think there probably is a proto language. I mean, there is an evolutionary capacity for language. And that evolutionary capacity for language found many kinds of differentiation, but every kind of language still tried to do some of the same things. And you have to be a linguist to understand more about this. Obviously, I don't understand anything about it, but I do know that this story about the Tower of Babel, it's a really complicated story. I'm not going to be able to get into it today because I'm almost out of time. But the story of Tower of Babel gets into ziggurats, and it goes all the way back to the origins of Western civilization in the Fertile Crescent. I mean, you're basically looking at the story here of Ur, you're looking at the story of Uruk, you're looking at the creation of the first cities. And this is basically explaining to you what people were thinking when they built a ziggurat and how they, like what they were trying to do. And the idea was that they were trying to build a tower to God. That's kind of the story. And in a way, they're kind of right. I mean, ziggurats were meant as a way to elevate a certain religious class above the rest of the people and to justify their existence. So the creation of ziggurats, pyramids, it becomes a central focus of these cultures. And this is another story. Probably one of the last things I want to say here, because I'm really just about out of time. One of the things I love about this is that when I first studied this, I learned about bitumen. And bitumen is this tar that like exists all over the Middle East. And bitumen is what's used to put together the ziggurats. And if you don't know what a ziggurat is, I encourage you to go look up some of the cities like Ur and Uruk and learn about ziggurats because they're really cool. They're some of the first monumental architecture that people created in the Levant, and it's all very interesting. Anyways, I'm out of time. That's the story of Noach from my strange lens as an atheist. I hardly talked about anything, and yet somehow I managed to fill up an entire hour. So thank you so much for studying Torah with me this week. If you made it all the way through, many blessings to you and to anyone that you love or care about. I hope you have a great week, and we will see you next week for another episode of Atheist Torah Study. Oh, and if you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me you can write to atheisttorahstudy@gmail.com. You can also find me on TikTok at Atheist Torah Study and on YouTube at Atheist Torah Study. My name is Emma. Thanks so much and have a blessed day.